Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today, and it is absolutely that time. Last December, I wrapped up Baldur's Gate 3, and we're here in December again talking about Baldur's Gate 3. It has been a full year since I've picked this game up. I've only dabbled a little bit with some of the new patches that Larian dropped, and of course I knew I was gonna love playthrough number 2 of Baldur's Gate 3. As someone who's played a lot of Divinity Original Sin in my day, I know that playthrough 1 and 2 will be completely different in a Larian video game. It's the main reason I fell in love with their video games in the first place. However, I was not prepared for the journey that the Dark Urge would be. And what I wanted to do in this 2024 review was just have an all-encompassing discussion of the new things that Larian has added to the game, how it's impacted my playthrough, and just light that fire in you, even if it's ill-advised with a lot of new games coming out, to try Baldur's Gate 3 again, because we all know we're slacking on playthrough 2, 3, 4, 15, 20, I don't know. It's one of those games that you just have to accept it's almost impossible, unless you sit on YouTube all day, to see literally everything this game has to offer, especially with the patchwork Larian did to add new scenes in the epilogue, new romance scenes. There is so much content in this game. It is ridiculous. And that's not accounting for any sort of DLC, which they decided not to do to move on to their next 2 video games. So the fact that it is that big, that expansive, and we're here in playthrough 2, I know many of you are way ahead of me, but my God, am I just being knocked on my ass time in, time out. And that is why this game has an insane player count. For a single player game to get no true DLC, and for you to look at these Steam player charts you see on screen right now, this is absolutely abnormal. But it makes me feel so good every time I see it, because it shows sticking to your guns, making true hardcore single player RPGs is the wave, especially when you're as reactive as a Larian RPG. So I just want to go through my time with a new Baldur's Gate 3 playthrough, gush about it a ton, and I want to hear from you who may have actually put in many more playthroughs than I. So originally playthrough number 2 was a Githyanki monk for me. I discovered this playstyle a ways into playthrough 1, but I did playthrough 1 in co-op, so I had to account for my friend who was in there, and we could only pick 2 party members to take with us on our journey, and that being, of course, Shadowheart and Karlach being the main loves in this party. However, now this playthrough is totally by myself, so I get that extra party member slot of someone I can invest in, but I have to take on the ultimate challenge, which is actually living up to my word and doing something completely different from what I would normally do in an RPG, which is just cater to all of my tastes constantly. So now I have to bring party members in like Asterion outside of completing their personal missions. Asterion, Will, of course I have to bring in Gale, and so on. These are characters that I slept on a little bit throughout Baldur's Gate 3 and playthrough 1, just doing their respective loyalty missions, if you will, but otherwise not spending time really getting to know them. So now I'm challenging myself to do that differently. And definitely in the case of leaving Shadowheart in the dust, I'm challenging my heart, I will be honest.
Do that again, and I'll split your skull.
But it was also about righting wrongs. So in Act 2, for example, no spoilers, but there is a long-standing character that appears, and in my first playthrough, this individual bit the dust, and I didn't get to enjoy a great moment in Baldur's Gate 3 that paid a lot of love to longtime fans. I wanted to experience that, so I get to right that wrong. But also, I get to wrong some rights because I wanted to be a psychopath in this playthrough. Get my Kev Do It swagger on, right? Be an absolute psychopath from start to finish. And what better way to do that than the Dark Urge? So I just dropped my playthrough number 2 that it was originally the Githyanki monk I was working on and went fresh into the Dark Urge. And when you hear this intro from the character, like, how could you not want to play as him?
My rancid blood whispers to me, kill, kill, and kill again. My ruined body yearns to reap death in this world.
Like, okay, Shakespeare, say less, take my money, take my playthrough time, I'm in. Now, playing as the Dark Urge is interesting because now that I'm a ways into this second playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, I'm kind of thinking I need to go back and understand a little bit more of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, in particular 2, which is widely regarded as one of the best role-playing games of all time. But still, just seeing how messed up the Dark Urge playthrough can get, I will just say, waking up with blood on my hands, I am so shocked at how different this playthrough is. It feels like an entirely different game packed into one. What's also deeply fascinating about the Dark Urge playthrough are the little internal monologues you have, like night one in the camp, just resting. It's the ideas, the things going through your character's head. It feels like I'm not playing as myself as I did in playthrough 1, where I created my own character. I'm playing as someone, which I have to admit, I typically don't do in a Larian game. Like when they have the origin story character offerings in things like Divinity Original Sin, or of course Baldur's Gate 3, I don't usually partake. I want to have my personal stamp on the game. So maybe people in the comments down below could let me know their thoughts on origin story playthroughs and if they're actually worthwhile. But this is my first time really playing as someone who's not me in a Larian game, and it's been fantastic. It's been a journey, to say the least, and perfectly fitting for someone as evil as myself in this game. But my God, have they added a lot to this game. I know a lot of the talk of the town with Baldur's Gate 3 is like, oh man, they didn't do DLC. That's so pro-consumer of them that they were working on DLC and they decided to drop it, and they're not doing the obvious Baldur's Gate 4. They're going to leave that to someone else, and my guess is probably the Pathfinder developers will end up with Baldur's Gate because it seems like the right fit. They seem to fit the mold. I don't know if they'll make a Larian style experience, but they do fit the mold. I think Baldur's Gate 4 is just in a weird spot where like Larian evolved their tech so dramatically that when that game comes around, it could just be a step back to more of the classic style of Baldur's Gate. We'll see nonetheless. I'm going to stay open-minded to it, and I am excited to see what Baldur's Gate 4 ends up being. But no DLC is kind of a gross exaggeration of what actually happened here. There's DLC. It's just not your traditional downloadable content that you'd hope for in an RPG. Like, they added mods, and for starters, it's an in-game mod manager. It's all very easy. It's there, and so you can get new classes, which I did. You can get visual changes. You can get name changes, like calling Withers Bone Daddy, because why not? I mean, there are plenty, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of mods, hundreds of mods to download, to sift through here that can change how you think about your playthrough. I think the most fun ones are the different classes that they bring here, because this is such a deep role-playing game that you can truly be anyone or anything you want. And these play really well into the scripts that were made for the game. And while a lot of the choice and consequence in this game is the focal point of the conversation for a Baldur's Gate 3, it also does come down to the amount of ways you can play and how I find it to be equally paralyzing, because Baldur's Gate 3 is like really fun to play for me. Obviously, being able to silver tongue my way through situations and having those skill checks constantly in my face is something that sets my RPG brain ablaze. That's obviously fantastic, but it's also just like, hey, I had to give up on my Githyanki monk, which I love the Githyanki monk style because it's just so like epic kung fu kind of driven. I just think it's so cool. Or I had to give up on my ranger who does a little bit of that Gloomstalker subclass build, and that I used in my first playthrough. And while at first my character was the weakest in the party, you bet with the amount of attacks I got turn 1, I was the difference maker by endgame. So I had to let go of a little bit of that. Of course, you can customize your companions to fit these sorts of styles, but point being is the druid was ridiculously versatile. And I see all these options and I get excited about them because I'm thinking, oh my God, all of these are fun to play as. All of them are drastically different. They have deployed different status effects on enemies. They interact with the world differently. They interact in the story differently. It is, as I said at the top of all of this, the type of game where I just have to sit there, swallow my pride and go, Matt, look, brother, you're not going to see it all. And that's what led me to the Dark Urge, because I had that mixture of like, this is going to be a totally different story. At the same time, this is also going to be a totally different gameplay style for me. So I actually kind of went more of the mage route. I don't really like my choice on that front so far because you are a glass cannon, and I forgot that Act 1 for Baldur's Gate 3, at least in my experience, is pretty tough. This game will slap you upside the head multiple times and will happily ruin your day. Now, because I played Baldur's Gate 3 already, there was a little degree of I know what encounters to avoid, or more importantly, how to position myself before the inevitable encounter. And so that went a long way for me, at least. But there are just so many ways to play the game, not just in class, not just in story, but in modes, right? You have the tactician mode that they have in this game, where it's a lot of buffed enemies and much more strategic, much more difficult combat. Added in after the game's launch is honor mode. This introduces much tougher boss fights. It's permadeath. You get one save slot. Of course, that's like the Iron Man playthrough, right? So you also have to challenge yourself to not save scum. It's tough. And then there's even custom modes where you can kind of pick and choose what exactly you want to do in Baldur's Gate 3, right? And that's where I say again, people go, well, there's no DLC for Baldur's Gate 3. I'm like, there's been a lot of stuff added. If that's not enough, what about the patches they've added? Let's go through all 7 of them, because for starters, the optimization work they've done for this game, it's in a totally different state from a year ago. I know it was kind of sacrilege to talk any level of smack on Baldur's Gate 3, and I get it. It is a penultimate RPG, and obviously as an RPG fan, I was there singing its praises too. But this game set my computer on fire, basically. Like, anytime I touched it, it was hot to the touch, unlike any other game before it. Act 3 was buggy as hell. It ran poorly at times. Like, Baldur's Gate 3 late game had a lot of issues, and because a lot of people were pulling the trigger on their reviews like month 1, yeah, we saw exactly what happened, which a lot of people kind of got exposed for not talking about the technical issues. But your boy, don't worry, I waited till December to review the game. I took my time going through it for sure when it came out, what, the end of August? Anyway, looking at all of these patches, beyond the optimization, they've added a considerable amount to Baldur's Gate 3. Patch 7 brought in 13 new cinematics to give conclusions to evil playthroughs, such as my own. There's new legendary actions for boss fights. Of course, the aforementioned modding was added here. Patch 6 brought unique kissing animations per character, including endgame romance exchanges to kind of deepen that relationship with specific characters. There's new idle animations at the camp, but also you can replace party members by talking with the party member you want to replace them with, so you don't have to sprint all over the camp. This is a really underrated quality of life improvement that I didn't see many people talking about, but it's really, really good, especially if you're playing single player. You can't tell your friend like, hey, you go get rid of Karlach, I'm gonna go get rid of Shadowheart, which no one should ever do, but let's say you're doing that, okay? It makes it a lot easier now. Patch 5 introduced an epilogue, which brings a whole new section of the game to give you some closure. Now, I imagine most of my audience has played and completed this game, but just on the off chance that you haven't, and for some reason you've been sitting on the fence for Baldur's Gate, or you just haven't finished it because of time commitments, whatever it may be, I won't spoil it, but this epilogue, I think, is deeply important to this game. I'm very happy that in my first playthrough, I did end up, and it was just by sheer coincidence, getting to the point where the epilogue was added in a recent patch and finishing the game then, because it really does give you a true level of conclusion on this story, where when I was talking to a friend who played it multiple times and beat it multiple times, he's like, yeah, it ends there instead without the epilogue. I was like, really? So it was not open-ended or bad. It's just way better with the epilogue. That's a huge addition to me. This is where they added honor mode, the aforementioned very difficult permadeath mode I was just talking about. And performance improvements for Act 3 actually came in patch 5. So this was, I think, the most significant patch for the game in its lifespan. There was patch 4, which brought over 1,000 fixes to the game, allowed you to customize the hirelings appearances that you brought into your party, and also enabled the usage of FSR, which was key because, again, the game's performance was terrible for a lot of people. Patch 3 brought in max support in the magic mirror, so you could change your appearance, not your class or your race, that sort of thing, but you could still alter how you look. Patch 2 added a very important scene for Karlach, who is my personal favorite character in the entire game, and also more optimization as well as fixing broken quests. And patch 1 was just all bug fixes, all blocker fixes. So yes, while many people act like there was not really any post-launch support for Baldur's Gate 3, there was a ton of it in meaningful content. The epilogue, the modes, the modding, the cinematics, the stuff that I personally care the most about in a single-player RPG like this is found here in the add-ons afterwards. And while I would kill to get more Baldur's Gate 3 from Larian, I really respect where they left it, because I'm here on playthrough 2 and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to see every dimension of the game, where I don't know if it ever really needed DLC. I will say this though, is that with the epilogue, with the conversations you had, I remember saying it in my review, and I was wrong about this, I felt very confident they would do DLC. Not only did it make complete financial sense, it also just narratively is set up a little bit, where now you're hoping with Baldur's Gate 4, maybe they'll pass the baton in there, but maybe not, I don't know. But that is one of my tiny gripes of the game, is that by the end of it all, it feels like there's more coming, and they were planning on doing more, and they decided to inevitably drop it. So you don't feel too much like you were losing out on a ton of content there. It's not like the Quarians in Mass Effect Andromeda, my favorite example of like, what happened to that, man? There's not that moment, but you do have a degree of an open thread that will be pulled maybe years down the line. Still, Baldur's Gate 3, I don't need to tell you for the millionth time, is phenomenal. That much was obvious, but I just really wanted to highlight in this re-review how the Dark Urge playthrough has been really different for me. Just seeing my character become a unintentionally at one point, murderous menace, the reactions to people around me, and in turn, the tendrils that it's drawing to Baldur's Gate 2? in certain ways. Like, I'm very impressed by how different this is. Of course, the gameplay, like, again, I've played a ton of Larian games. I've replayed Divinity Original Sin 2 like 4 times. So yeah, I knew the gameplay experience would be different, but I'm truly impressed with how they've evolved their technology, that they managed to keep up that level of like different scenes appearing based on who your character is and choices you've made. That was really what defined this company for me personally. And I still think this is some of the best motion capture in the world. Like, I love how real these characters feel. Their little mannerisms when they pause while speaking, their hand movements, their eye movements. It's not perfect. It's got a touch of RPG, jagged edges to it, but the way they behave feels original per line. I don't feel like I'm going through the constant same animation cycles that I see in a lot of games where they're like, okay, this is the part where we cut the budget and we have like 4 animations for when people are talking to you, and otherwise it's full motion capture. Baldur's Gate 3's characters feel just so real to me because of that performance capture. It goes a really, really long way, especially characters like Lae'zel, who are constantly angry, constantly expressing their distaste, like the eyebrow movements, the scowling at you. It just does so much to make her believable. You're not just reading words on a paper and it's a great voice performance. Again, I've said it like 4 times now, I'm sorry. It just feels real. So yeah, this game from top to bottom is beautiful. I've been really enjoying playthrough number 2, and I just wanted to share that with the world. So for those of you who have many more playthroughs than I, sound off down below. If you've never played Baldur's Gate before, please sound off down below. What are you waiting for? Please pick it up. This is one of the best gaming purchases that you can make. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. Let me know what you think of BG3 down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.